Hello, I'm doing a DVD collection video, and in this video I'm going to be talking about my favorite horror films that came out in the 1960s. Now, the 60s, of course, was a very interesting time, not just in terms of what happened in the 60s, but, in terms of, movies. You definitely saw, a change in movies. You saw movies start to take more risks, with their subject matter, and I think the 60s was also when the whole New Hollywood movement began, so you definitely saw movies start to change a lot, start to take a lot more risks, and I feel like the horror genre especially seemed to do that. You got a lot of horror films in the 60s which would kind of foreshadow what horror films would eventually become, and now, I actually did a video similar to this a couple of years ago, but I took that video down because I wanted to redo it because there were a couple movies I added onto the list of my favorite horror films from the 60s, and there were even some movies I even took off that list, so I just decided to redo it. So, yeah. So the first movie I want to talk about is Psycho, which of course is directed by Alfred Hitchcock and is based on the novel by Robert Bloch. Now, Psycho, of course, is considered to be one of the most influential horror films ever made, and this would pretty much inspire the whole slasher genre, and I know a lot of people do consider this to be, the first slasher film, but Psycho is a great movie, and I have read the book that this movie is based on by Robert Bloch, but, yeah, if you haven't seen Psycho, definitely check it out, but I'm pretty sure there's very few people watching this video who haven't seen Psycho. The next movie I want to talk about is Gorgo, and this is a movie that I actually just recently saw last night, but this was a really good movie. Basically, it's about these people who capture this giant dinosaur-like creature, and they bring it to London, and they end up making it an attraction at the zoo in London, but it turns out that it's just a baby, and the creature's mother ends up coming for it, and let's just say it doesn't end well at all. But yeah, that's Gorgo. I would definitely recommend it. The next movie I want to talk about is an Italian horror film called Black Sunday, which is directed by Mario Bava, and I think this was actually Mario Bava's first movie, but basically this is about a witch played by Barbara Steele who was killed back in the Middle Ages, and now it's 200 years later, and she comes back from the dead as a vampire. It's a pretty good movie. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend checking it out, and it also goes by the title The Mask of Satan, so yeah, if you want, definitely check this movie out. The next movie I want to talk about is a movie I have on this box set called Horror Classics, which is one of those 50 movie packs that has 50 different horror movies on it, but the movie I want to talk about is a Roger Corman movie called The Little Shop of Horrors, and this is the original The Little Shop of Horrors, and this actually inspired the Broadway musical, and it inspired the 1980s musical, The Little Shop of Horrors was originally intended to be a semi-sequel to another Roger Corman movie called A Bucket of Blood, which came out a year before this one, but I love the original The Little Shop of Horrors. It's such a hilarious movie. It's more of a horror comedy, but it's a really fun movie, and it has Dick Miller in it, and it even has Jack Nicholson in it, and this was when Jack Nicholson, back when he was really young, and I know Jack Nicholson pretty much started out in a lot of Roger Corman's movies, but The Little Shop of Horrors, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. The next movie I want to talk about is another movie that I have on the Horror Classics box set, which is also directed by Roger Corman, and that movie is The Last Woman on Earth. Now, basically that's about this couple and their lawyer who are down on this island, and something happens where all the people on the island die except them, and they're not sure if it was just the whole island that died or if it really was the whole world that died. But basically the film, as the film progresses, like the lawyer starts to fall in love with the woman, and basically it leads to conflicts between the lawyer and this woman's husband. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I remember it being a really good movie. But yeah, that's The Last Woman on Earth. Next movie I want to talk about is another one of Roger Corman's movies, and that movie is The Fall of the House of Usher. Now, The Fall of the House of Usher is actually written by Richard Matheson, and it stars Vincent Price, and it's actually based on the short story by Edgar Allan Poe, and this is actually the first of a series of films that Roger Corman, Richard Matheson, and Vincent Price worked on, which were all based on Edgar Allan Poe short stories, and I definitely recommend The Fall of the House of Usher, and I also recommend The Pit and the Pendulum, which is once again directed by Roger Corman, and it's written by Richard Matheson and based on an Edgar Allan Poe story, and this one actually stars Vincent Price and Barbara Steele, but I recommend both of these. Both of these are pretty good movies. The next movie I want to talk about is yet another movie that I have on the Horror Classics box set, and that movie is Carnival of Souls. Now, Carnival of Souls came out in 1962, and this has to be one of the creepiest movies I've ever seen in my life. For a movie that came out in 1962, it's actually scarier than some horror films that you see today. But basically, Carnival of Souls is about a woman who gets into a car accident and her two friends are killed, but she lives, but she starts getting pursued by this guy, and she's the only one who can see this guy, and you're not sure if she's going crazy or if there's something supernatural actually happening to her, but it's a very, very creepy movie, and I know people like David Lynch and George Romero were both inspired by this movie, but yeah, if you haven't seen Carnival of Souls, I highly recommend it. Next movie I want to talk about is a movie I have on this box set with a bunch of Hammer films, and the movie is The Phantom of the Opera from 1962. Now, of course, there have been countless different versions of The Phantom of the Opera, but the one I'm talking about is one that was produced by Hammer in 1962, and I actually have this on VHS somewhere, but the 1962 version of The Phantom of the Opera was always one of my favorites. Like, I always used to watch it a lot when I was a little kid, but if you can, definitely track down the 1962 version of Phantom of the Opera from Hammer. It's definitely worth a look. The next movie I want to talk about is Tales of Terror from 1962. Now, this is another one of Roger Corman and Richard Matheson's Edgar Allan Poe movies. This is actually an anthology film. It's 3 stories in one, and each of the stories are based on Edgar Allan Poe stories, and the film stars Vincent Price, Peter Lorre, and Basil Rathbone. I think I'm saying his last name right, but this is probably my favorite of Roger Corman and Richard Matheson's Edgar Allan Poe movies. At least it was the first one that I saw, and I don't know, I really enjoyed this one. If you can, definitely check this this one out. The next movie I want to talk about is Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which stars Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. And this is a really good movie. Basically, it's about these two former actresses who are both sisters, and the one actress has always been more successful than the other one, and something happens to her which appears to be an accident where she gets paralyzed, and now she's in a wheelchair, and now they're both old women. And what happens is Bette Davis's character has always been really jealous of her sister, and this jealousy causes her to pretty much have a psychotic breakdown, and she pretty much starts torturing her now wheelchair-bound sister, who she now lives with. And I really don't want to give too much else away about this movie, but this is a really good movie. I highly recommend it.